My mother-in-law, Linda Mitchell, slid a cream-colored envelope beside my plate and announced to the dinner table that I was no longer responsible enough to control household money. Then she read my purchases aloud and said every expense over $50 would need her approval because my husband, Owen, and I supposedly owed the family more than $90,000. I am Sarah Mitchell, 35, a hospital accounts payable analyst, and for 5 years I had swallowed Linda's questions about money because she helped us buy our home, and Owen kept asking me to preserve the peace. But I knew what we had paid. Her number was impossible, and Owen's silence hurt more than the humiliation. I did not argue. I kept the statement, refused to sign anything, and decided I would reconcile every dollar myself. On the drive home, Owen admitted Linda had already prepared a replacement promissory note. We had 3 days to sign it, or she would fire him and demand the family loan immediately. The 3-day deadline followed us into the house like another passenger. Owen set his keys on the counter and stood there with his coat still on while I carried Linda's statement to the kitchen table. I wanted him to say his mother had made a mistake. Instead, he rubbed his face and said we should sleep before making anything worse. I had seen the pattern for years, delay the argument until surrender could pass for peace. I had let her question grocery bills, work shoes, even a weekend trip, because every objection made Owen tense and every silence seemed to buy us another normal week. But I could not make more than $90,000 disappear by being polite. I opened the drawer where we kept the original family loan papers and laid the promissory note beside Linda's statement. 5 years earlier, she had lent us $80,000 toward our home. We had been paying it steadily. Her new balance was impossible unless years of payments had somehow vanished. At work the next day, I used my lunch break to log into our joint bank account and trace transfers to Linda month by month. As an accounts payable analyst, I spent my days matching payments to dates, approvals, and destinations. I did the same with my own life. I did not call Linda or accuse anyone. I created a private spreadsheet and entered only what I could verify. By evening, I knew it was not a rounding error. After dinner, I asked Owen for the pay stubs stored with our tax records. He stiffened and asked why I needed them. I told him I was trying to prove his mother wrong without humiliating anybody. He said Linda used complicated bookkeeping because the company sometimes helped relatives in different ways, then asked me not to turn every line into evidence. Evidence was exactly what a line became when somebody used it to claim my house. On an older pay stub, I found a deduction labeled Family Advance Recovery. The same code appeared again months later and then the following year. Owen said it was probably Linda's label for assistance she had given us. I asked what assistance we had received during those pay periods. He could not name any. He reminded me that his mother had helped us when nobody else could. Gratitude was the shield Linda always stood behind. I told him I was not denying the original loan. I was trying to separate what we actually owed from whatever had been added later. He asked me to stop for the night. When I asked whether he wanted to know if the $90,000 balance was real, he looked away. For the first time, I saw that my husband might fear the answer more than the debt. The next evening, I retrieved older bank statements and matched our transfers against the payment schedule in the original note. We had once paid late after a furnace repair, but the pattern was clear. We had not ignored the loan, and we had not borrowed another fortune. I put the unexplained payroll deductions in a separate column because I still did not know where they went, even without treating them as payments. The balance I could justify was nowhere near Linda's number. I printed the strongest pages and carried them to work in my bag. Hiding records from my own husband made me feel sick, but I no longer knew what might reach Linda if I left them in our kitchen. It was the first thing in days that felt like a door I could still lock. Then the pattern changed the meaning of everything. Several large, family advance recovery deductions appeared in months when Linda's own household statements showed no new advance to us at all. One appeared after we had already made both our mortgage payment and our scheduled payment on her loan. I sat in my car outside the hospital after my shift and ran the totals again because I wanted to be wrong. I was not. Money had been taken from Owen's paycheck under a family debt label, but it had never entered our household and had not reduced the balance Linda now claimed. The danger was no longer just humiliation. The records could make our home appear tied to obligations I could not identify. I did not know where the deductions led, but I knew what they could cost if I signed the replacement note Linda was demanding. I showed Owen the timeline that night. He barely read the first page before saying his mother would have an explanation. I asked him to help me get it. He said confronting Linda would make everything worse. I reminded him that I had listed dates and amounts, not accusations. He asked whether I trusted him. The question hurt because it dragged us away from numbers and back toward loyalty, the ground where Linda always seemed strongest. I told him I trusted him enough to want him beside me while we found out what had happened to our money. He said his job depended on his mother and we could lose everything if I pushed too hard. I heard the word we, but the anger he seemed to fear was still Linda's. Mine was something he expected me to manage quietly. Linda came to our house the following evening without waiting for an invitation. She carried the red ledger binder I had seen at family gatherings and a thick envelope holding the replacement promissory note. Owen let her inside. Linda sat at my kitchen table as if it were another office she controlled and opened the binder to pages of typed balances and handwritten notes. I asked for the source documents behind the new charges. She told me the ledger was the source. I asked for records showing when we had received the advances she claimed. Her face hardened. She said family help was not a bank transaction to be picked apart by someone who had benefited from it, then looked at Owen and said my obsession was humiliating him. I had spent years telling myself his silence meant he hated conflict. Sitting across from Linda, I saw what that silence did in practice. It left me alone to absorb her pressure. I slid the unsigned note back across the table. I told Linda I would not sign a new debt until she gave us a complete accounting that could be matched to payments, payroll deductions, and money we had actually received. She closed the red binder and said Owen's next paycheck would reflect the family's need to protect itself. I asked whether she was threatening to reduce his wages because I refused to sign a private note. Linda did not answer. She only said actions had consequences. Owen finally spoke, but only to ask both of us to calm down. One woman was claiming authority over our income and our home, and the man I married was asking for a quieter tone. After Linda left, Owen asked me to consider signing temporarily and disputing the numbers later. I told him there was nothing temporary about my signature. Once I acknowledged the balance, Linda could point to the paper and say I had accepted it myself. Owen said losing his job could destroy us before any dispute was resolved. I told him signing a debt I could not verify could destroy us more slowly. We slept beside each other that night with a distance between us that felt larger than the room. The next morning, Owen forwarded me an email from Linda. Because we had rejected the amended note, she wrote, the family intended to demand the entire outstanding balance within 10 days. She also said his compensation would be adjusted until the matter was resolved. I saved the email with the statements, pay stubs, and my reconciliation. The 3-day signature threat had become a 10-day countdown against our home, while the paycheck we depended on could be squeezed at Linda's discretion. For years, I had believed keeping peace kept me safe. Now every quiet compromise looked like another lock she had been allowed to install. I still did not know where the unexplained deductions led. I only knew that if I stopped digging, Linda would soon control the debt, the income, and the story of why I deserved both. The only way I could keep Linda from owning the story was to follow the numbers. The morning after her email, I copied every saved pay stub Owen had given me and arranged the deductions by date. I worked before sunrise at the kitchen table. Owen came downstairs, saw the pages, and asked whether I had slept. I told him I would sleep when I understood why money had been taken from his paycheck without reducing the debt his mother claimed we owed. He said there had to be an explanation. I had spent too many years accepting explanations before seeing the documents behind them. By evening, a pattern had emerged. The deductions did not follow the payment schedule in our original promissory note. Several grew larger around periods I remembered because Owen's younger brother, Nate Mitchell, had been struggling with his contractor supply business. I knew only what I had personally heard at dinners. A delayed shipment one winter, a supplier dispute the following spring, then another stretch when Linda kept saying Nate was between contracts. I marked those memories as unverified context, not proof. The dates bothered me anyway. Each time Nate's business seemed to wobble, the deductions from Owen's pay seemed to swell. I could not prove the money went to Nate. I could prove that it left our household. I asked Owen for every remaining pay stub and benefits notice he could access from home. He hesitated, then said using company records this way could make Linda think he was building a case against her. I reminded him they were his own employment records. He gave me files he had already downloaded, but he would not sign into the company portal while I sat there. I had begun this believing I was protecting both of us. Owen still seemed more afraid of what I might find. The next night, I asked him one question as plainly as I could. Had he ever authorized Linda to deduct money from his paycheck for anything other than the house loan? Owen looked at me and said no, not once. He said Linda handled payroll adjustments, and he had never approved any separate family debt. For a few minutes, I let myself believe him. I wanted one clean fact that meant my husband and I were still on the same side. I even closed my spreadsheet. He reached for my hand, and I nearly mistook relief for trust. The lie lasted less than an hour. Owen went to our den to print employment forms he might need if Linda fired him. Later, I collected a page that had fallen from the printer. Beneath it was an email chain with Owen's name in the header and mine in the subject line. I did not search his computer. The first sentence I could see said he did not want me told until Nate's problem was fixed. I read the chain because it concerned money taken from our household. The messages were from an earlier year. Owen had asked Linda to deduct a limited amount from several paychecks to help Nate cover an inventory shortage. His own words said it was temporary. He named a fixed limit and asked Linda to stop once that amount had been reached. Linda's reply agreed. That was all the pages proved, but it was enough. Owen had looked at me less than an hour earlier and denied authorizing any separate deduction. Worse, the later pay stubs showed the same family advance recovery, code continuing long after the amount in his email should have been exhausted. I carried the printout into the kitchen. Owen saw it and went pale. He said he had forgotten because it had been years ago. I asked how someone forgot secretly taking household income to cover his brother's business shortage. He said Nate had been close to losing inventory. Linda had promised it would be short term, and he thought telling me would only start a fight. I asked whether he understood what that meant, now that Linda was trying to attach more than $90,000 to our home. Owen said the arrangement had never been meant to touch the house. I told him intention was not the same thing as a record. That was when the danger changed shape. Until then, I had been fighting Linda's inflated number. Now I had proof that at least one family expense unrelated to our house had entered Owen's payroll under the same vague recovery label she was using against us. I still did not know where the later deductions went, and I would not pretend I did. But I could see how a temporary favor could be folded into something larger while nobody demanded a clear accounting. If Linda could keep deducting after the agreed limit and then roll unexplained balances into a replacement note, our home was no longer just part of an argument. It was the asset she was trying to make answer for obligations I had never accepted. Owen kept saying he had only wanted to help his brother. I told him helping Nate was not the same as lying to me. He said I was turning one bad decision into proof that our marriage was broken. I told him the marriage was not breaking because I found the paper. It was breaking because the paper existed and he had denied it. Then he asked me to blame him instead of destroying his relationship with Linda. That sentence stayed with me. In his mind, I could either absorb the damage quietly or become the person who tore his family apart. I stopped asking him to choose a side. I told him I would not give Linda another bank statement, receipt, account balance, or signature, and I would not agree to any new family debt without independent records. I asked Owen to make the same promise. He looked down and said he needed time. That was answer enough. I moved the evidence folder into the locked cabinet in my home office and changed the password on my personal banking login. I hated that safety had begun to look like secrecy inside my own marriage. Linda's retaliation came quickly. Owen's next paycheck was far smaller than usual. I knew because he showed me the deposit notice after staring at it in silence. He said Linda had described the reduction as an adjustment while the family balance was under dispute. By that afternoon, 2 relatives had texted Owen, not me, asking why I was controlling his finances and risking his job over money his mother had supposedly loaned us. I knew what they believed because Owen showed me the messages. I did not know what Linda had told them word for word, so I refused to invent it. The result was enough. My request for accounting had become an attack on Owen. That night, he slept in the guest room. I sat alone with the mortgage due date, utility bills, and our reduced income on my screen. I opened a new emergency account in my own name and redirected only my own paycheck into it. I left the joint account untouched except for bills we had already agreed to pay. It was not revenge. It was the first financial boundary I had built, without asking whether Linda would be offended or Owen would be uncomfortable. Before bed, I sent one short message to Monica Reed, the former payroll administrator at Mitchell Building Supply. I knew Monica from company events and from one odd comment years earlier when she quietly told me to save every pay stub. I asked whether there was a legitimate way for an employee to verify old payroll adjustments. I did not send her confidential documents or ask her to investigate Linda. Near midnight, Monica replied. She said she could not discuss company record, but if Owen wanted to understand what had been done to his pay, he should locate every adjustment notice attached to his own employee history. Owen was asleep behind another door. Linda controlled the company, his paycheck, and the family story. I had the email proving Owen had lied, deductions that outlived the only authorization I had seen, and a warning from the former payroll employee who had once told me to keep records. The plan to save my marriage by staying calm was gone. I was no longer trying to convince Owen that something was wrong. I was trying to find out how much had already been done while I was still trusting him to tell me. The warning from Monica sat on my phone when I woke the next morning, and for the first time since Linda had put that cream envelope beside my plate, I knew exactly what I needed from Owen. Not an apology, not another promise that his mother had probably meant well. I needed access to the records attached to his own paycheck. Monica Reed, the former payroll administrator at Mitchell Building Supply, had told me only that employees could verify old adjustments through their own history. She had not sent me a document or accused Linda of anything. That mattered. I was learning to separate what I feared from what I could prove. I carried that discipline into the guest room doorway, where Owen sat tying his shoes. I told him Monica had replied and that adjustment notices should exist in his employee account. His first question was not what they might show. It was whether Linda knew I had contacted Monica. I said no, because as far as I knew, she did not. Then I asked Owen to sign into his account himself and look. He said doing that now would feel like building a case against his mother. I reminded him that the company had already reduced his pay. Linda had threatened our house, and we were inside the 10-day deadline she had created. He said I was making everything sound worse than it was. I asked what part I had exaggerated. He had no answer. Before I found his email to Linda, I had treated his hesitation like weakness I could compensate for. Now I understood that every delay gave someone else time to define our debt. I told him I would not log into his account or touch a company system I had no right to access. If he wanted the truth, he had to open his own records. Owen left for work without answering. By late afternoon, he texted that his management access had been limited. When he came home, he told me Linda had removed him from several operational approvals until the family matter was resolved. I knew that because he told me directly. I did not know what Linda had said when I was not there. His employee self-service account still worked. After another long pause, he carried his laptop to the kitchen table. He signed in while I sat across from him. At first, we found only ordinary pay statements, tax forms, and benefits notices. Then he found an archived section for payroll adjustments and compensation notices. The oldest entries went back years. Each carried dates, codes, and authorization lines. We opened the ones matching the family advance recovery deductions I had documented. Some referred to the temporary amount Owen had authorized for Nate. Those fit the email chain. Then the entries continued. The later notices did not fit. One adjustment listed an internal account reference I remembered seeing on papers Nate had brought to a family barbecue when his contractor supply business was struggling. I did not treat that memory as proof. I wrote the code down. Another adjustment carried the same reference beside a larger deduction from Owen's pay. A third listed Linda's approval and said the amount had been reclassified for family recovery. Owen stared at the screen and said he had never seen that language. With his permission, I saved copies to the evidence folder and printed them. The document that changed everything was buried farther back. It showed a transfer from an account associated with vendor loss into the same recovery code used on Owen's paycheck. Linda's name appeared in the approval field. The note did not say that I owed the money, and I would not put words into a record that were not there. But it did show that a vendor loss balance had been moved into a code already being deducted from my husband's wages. Another archived note referenced recovering the balance through an amended household note before a future refinancing review. I read that line 3 times. I did not yet know whose refinancing review it meant or what Linda intended to present. I only knew amended household note matched the replacement promissory note she had tried to make me sign. Owen pushed his chair back. He said there had to be context. I told him I agreed. Context was exactly what we were going to get. He asked me not to call Linda that night. I had no intention of calling her. For once, we had a record she had not chosen to hand us. I called Monica from my car the next morning and told her only that Owen had located his archived notices. I read one generic code and asked how such notices were normally supposed to work. Monica said an employee adjustment should identify the reason sufficiently for payroll and accounting to trace it, even if the employee-facing description was abbreviated. She would not interpret our specific entries without company records, and she would not send me anything retained from her employment. Then she explained why she had once warned me to save every pay stub. Before she resigned, Linda had repeatedly asked her to process vague family-related deductions without the supporting documentation Monica expected. Monica said she objected, and after she left, Linda warned her that disclosing confidential company information could bring legal action. That threat was why she had stayed silent. Monica had confirmed a process and explained her silence. She had not confirmed my theory. That distinction steadied me. I needed records that would stand even if nobody wanted to take my side. At lunch, I searched public county property and civil court records using Linda's name, the family company name, and relatives I already knew. I was careful because a public filing can show that a claim existed without proving every accusation behind it. One older property record caught my attention. A Mitchell-controlled entity had recorded a lien connected to a family debt dispute against a relative's home, then released it later. I did not know whether that debt had been valid. The record did not prove Linda had committed wrongdoing, but it proved something important. The threat to turn a private family obligation into pressure against a house was not imaginary. That was when the danger stopped feeling theoretical. I had spent days telling myself our home was probably safe because rational people did not destroy a marriage over a disputed family balance. The filing told me rationality was not protection. If Linda could attach enough fear to the word family, nobody had to ask where the numbers came from. I showed Owen the public filing and told him exactly what it did and did not prove. He said I was searching for reasons to hate Linda. I pointed instead to the archived adjustment that moved a vendor loss balance into his recovery code. He said maybe Nate had owed the company money and Linda shifted it temporarily because the family expected everyone to help. I asked when I had agreed that my home or his wages could absorb another adult's business losses. He admitted I had not. I asked when he had. He said he had authorized only the limited amount in the email I had already found. I told him that was the line. Whatever happened after that was not something we could excuse by calling it family help. I contacted Thomas Hale that afternoon, an attorney whose name a hospital colleague had given me after a property dispute. 2 days later, I met him with copies of the original promissory note, my payment reconstruction, Owen's pay stubs, the limited authorization email, Linda's demand, and the archived adjustments Owen had downloaded himself. I explained where each document came from. Thomas did not tell me we had won anything. He said the smartest thing I had done was refuse to sign the amended note. A disputed balance, he explained, could become harder to challenge if I voluntarily acknowledged it in a new secured obligation. He recommended a formal written request for a complete accounting and advised us to separate the amount we could verify from every charge we disputed. Then he asked whether we understood what involving a lawyer might cost beyond the legal bill. I looked at Owen. We both understood. Linda controlled his job. The retainer came from savings we had set aside to repair our aging bathroom. Paying it hurt because that money represented ordinary plans, the kind couples make when they believe the future belongs to them. I signed the engagement letter anyway. I would rather live with cracked tile than a debt someone else could rewrite. Thomas sent the written dispute and request for accounting. I knew Linda had received it because Owen called me from the parking lot at work. He said his management authority had been suspended pending what the company called a family review. He was not fired, but he could no longer approve orders or supervise several processes he had handled for years. I asked whether he had anything in writing. He said yes. I told him to save it. He snapped that not everything had to become evidence, then apologized. I wanted to close the folder and pretend the old version of our marriage was still available. But every step toward the truth had produced a new punishment. Linda called Owen that evening while we were eating. I heard only his side because the phone was against his ear. He walked into the living room and returned several minutes later looking sick. I did not ask what Linda had said until he told me. According to Owen, his mother wanted him to meet her alone. She said there was still a way to fix everything if he came without me and stop turning a family disagreement into an outside legal problem. I asked what fix everything meant. Owen said she had not explained. He said he needed to hear her out because if there was any chance to keep his job and stop the threat against the house, Refusing would be reckless. I felt the old panic rise, the urge to forbid him from going, and then watch Linda use my fear as proof that I controlled him. I forced myself not to do it. I told Owen the choice was his. I would not stop him from meeting his mother, but I would not accept another secret agreement, hidden deduction, or promise made with my money attached to it. If he came home having signed something, or accepted new terms without telling me, I would treat that as the end of our financial partnership. He looked at me as if I had threatened our marriage. I had drawn the first boundary in it that did not depend on Linda's reaction. He left. The house became unbearable after the door closed. I refused to imagine conversations I could not hear. I did not know whether Linda was threatening him, offering him money, or doing none of those things. The only honest sentence I could tell myself was that my husband had gone to meet the woman, trying to make me sign a debt I could not verify. About an hour later, an email arrived from Thomas with a scanned response to his demand. The letter stated that the family intended to enforce the outstanding balance and that Owen's employment could be terminated if the dispute continued to interfere with company operations. It did not answer the accounting questions. It did not explain the vendor loss transfer. It threatened consequences. I printed it and placed it beside the archived adjustment. For the first time, the pieces formed a line I could hold in my hands. Money had been deducted beyond Owen's limited authorization. A vendor loss balance had been moved into the recovery code attached to his pay. An internal note connected recovery to an amended household note, and when I demanded an accounting, the response was pressure against his job and our claimed debt. I still did not know the full purpose of the scheme. I did not know what the refinancing reference meant, and I did not know what Linda would ask Owen to do. Those missing pieces mattered. But I finally had something stronger than suspicion. I had proof that the financial story Linda had been telling us was not clean. By the time headlights crossed the front window, I was standing beside the locked cabinet with one hand on the evidence folder. Owen had not yet come through the door. I knew only two things. The records could now hurt Linda's version of events, and Linda still held the two weapons most capable of hurting us back. His job, our house. If Owen came home carrying another secret, I would have to decide whether escaping Linda also meant stopping my husband from taking me back into her control. The headlights stopped in the driveway, and I stayed beside the locked cabinet until I heard Owen's key in the front door. He came in without taking off his coat. For one terrible second, I thought the silence meant he had accepted whatever Linda offered. I asked what happened. Owen said his mother had offered to restore his management authority, return his paycheck to normal, and reduce most of the family balance if he signed a statement saying I had misunderstood the payroll deductions and pressured him into challenging the company. He told me this himself, standing in our kitchen with his hands shaking. I asked whether he had signed it. He said no. Then he took a cream-colored envelope from inside his coat and placed it on the table. I recognized it immediately. It was the same kind Linda had put beside my plate when she announced that I could no longer be trusted with household money. Owen said the papers inside were for me. The first page was a proposed settlement. The family would reduce the disputed balance if I signed the amended promissory note, stopped requesting company records, and acknowledged a new lower amount as money legitimately owed. The number was still far above the balance I could verify. Another page required me to confirm the payroll deductions were proper. I read it twice. Linda was offering to make tens of thousands of dollars disappear if I agreed to stop asking where those dollars had come from. That was the moment the debt stopped behaving like a debt. A legitimate balance does not shrink because someone becomes obedient. I did not know what Linda believed privately, and I could not prove her full purpose yet. I could prove that the amount she called fixed had become negotiable as soon as I challenged her records. Owen said Linda had called this our last chance to keep the family from being destroyed. I asked what he had done. He said he refused to sign because he knew I had not authorized the deductions we had found. Relief came, but it did not erase his earlier lie. I told him one honest decision did not rebuild trust by itself. The next morning, I scanned every page from the envelope and sent the copies to Thomas Hale, the attorney helping me dispute Linda's balance. I listed only what I knew. Linda had offered to reduce the claimed debt if I signed the amended note, stopped requesting records, and confirmed that the payroll deductions were proper. Thomas told me not to sign anything. He was still waiting for the complete transaction accounting requested from Mitchell Building Supply. Until it arrived, the settlement papers showed pressure, not the entire scheme. The accounting arrived the following afternoon. Thomas forwarded it with a note telling me to compare the entries against the records I already had. I spread the printed pages across the dining table. Owen sat beside me. The outside accountant's report identified dates, internal references, and Linda's claimed family balance. I began with the original house loan. When I matched our bank payments against the report, the remaining principal came close to my own reconstruction. It was nowhere near Linda's claimed total. Then I reached entries that had no place in our household. Several charges corresponded to vendor shortages associated with Nate's contractor supply business. The report did not say Nate had ordered Linda to move them, and I did not assume that. It did show that amounts tied to those shortages appeared on the balance being attributed to Owen and me. One entry matched the vendor loss reference from the archived payroll adjustment Owen and I had saved. Another fell shortly before a large family advance recovery deduction from his paycheck. I checked each connection against the pay stubs. Owen remembered Nate mentioning an urgent supplier payment during one period. That memory was not documentary proof, so I kept it separate. The numbers already showed what mattered. Business losses that were not ours had been folded into the balance Linda wanted us to acknowledge with our home behind it. The danger changed. I had feared Linda could use a disputed debt to threaten our house. Now, an independent accounting showed that the house was being asked to answer for losses created somewhere else. I had spent years repaying money Linda actually lent us while she lectured us about responsibility. Yet the number she used to shame me contained obligations I had never accepted. Owen said his mother could not have expected me to sign without seeing this. I looked at the cream envelope and told him the sequence was documented. She demanded my signature before giving me a complete accounting. The report contained one more notation I did not understand. Besides several related party balances was a reference to an upcoming lender review and a plan to convert certain amounts into signed receivables. I called Thomas with the page in front of me. He explained that a signed receivable is much easier to present as a collectible obligation than a disputed internal balance. He could not tell me what Linda had represented to any lender, but the notation suggested the company wanted questionable family balances formally acknowledged before outside financial review. I reviewed everything we had collected: Linda's sudden 3-day deadline, the replacement note, the archived payroll adjustment referring to recovery through an amended household note, the vendor loss transfer, the threat against Owen's job, and now the accountant's notation about signed receivables. The pieces finally formed a pattern I could explain without guessing. The records indicated that losses connected to Nate's business had been pushed onto the balance attributed to us, and Linda urgently wanted that balance converted into an obligation bearing my signature before outside scrutiny. The humiliation at dinner looked different now. The envelope, the public reading of my purchases, the order that I asked permission for spending had made me feel irresponsible before I could examine the numbers. I could not prove every motive behind Linda's cruelty. I did not need to. I could prove enough to know that signing would have turned someone else's losses into a debt attached to my household. That night, Owen wanted to call Linda and demand an explanation. I told him an explanation could not replace the accounting. He said she deserved a chance to respond before we did anything that could destroy the company. I asked why protecting the company was still his first instinct after seeing our home used this way. He flinched. Owen reminded me that people worked there and families depended on it. I told him I had no intention of making claims beyond the records. I wanted the false balance removed, the legitimate loan separated from it, and the threats against our home and income stopped. If accurate accounting damaged the company, that was not damage I had created. The next day, Linda sent Owen a message, which he showed me, demanding a final family meeting at her house. She wanted the dispute settled privately before attorneys and outsiders did permanent damage. She told him he needed to decide whether he stood with his wife or with the family and company that had supported him his entire adult life. It was not a request to reconcile numbers. It was a demand for allegiance. I told Thomas about the meeting. He advised me not to sign anything and to keep my statements limited to documents I could identify. I brought copies, not originals. The original promissory note, my bank payment reconstruction, the pay stubs, Owen's limited authorization email, the archived adjustment showing the vendor loss transfer, and the outside accountant's report. I left the full evidence folder locked at home. Linda sat at the head of her dining table. Nate Mitchell, Owen's younger brother whose business shortages appeared in the accounting, sat near her. I knew Nate's role in the documents, but not what Linda had told him or whether he understood the transfers. My conflict was with the person demanding my signature and controlling the records. Linda began by saying lawyers had poisoned a family matter. I asked why vendor losses associated with Nate's business appeared in the balance she claimed Owen and I owed. She said the Mitchell family had always helped one another, and that money moved where it was needed. I asked whether I had ever agreed to repay those particular amounts. She said I had benefited from being part of the family. I asked again whether I had agreed to them. She did not answer directly. I placed the original note on the table and showed the payment total from our bank records. Then I placed Owen's email authorizing only the limited temporary deduction for Nate beside it. Owen confirmed that was the only amount he had authorized. I added the archived adjustment he had downloaded from his own employee account. The vendor loss transfer and Linda's approval line were visible. Linda looked at Owen and asked whether he understood what he was doing to his brother. Owen said he had agreed to help Nate temporarily, not to make me responsible for Nate's later losses. Hearing him say it in front of Linda almost undid me. It was the first time he had drawn the line where she could hear it instead of asking me to erase it privately. Linda told him that if he continued, his position at Mitchell Building Supply was finished. She reminded him that his entire professional life had been built through the company. Owen went still. I knew how much that job had shaped him. I did not tell him what to choose. If I forced him, Linda could spend the rest of our lives claiming he had simply exchanged one controlling woman for another. I said nothing. Linda pushed the cream-colored envelope toward me again. She said the reduced settlement remained available if I signed that night and stopped the accusations. I did not open it. I placed the outside accountant's report beside it and pointed first to the legitimate house loan balance, then to the entries tied to Nate's vendor shortages. I said I would repay what I could verify that we actually owed, but I would not sign a document making our home responsible for charges we had never accepted. Nate asked what I meant by vendor shortages. His question sounded confused, but I could not know what he knew. I showed him the accounting line without giving him my conclusion. Linda interrupted and said the company had covered obligations for everyone over the years. I told her covering an obligation was not the same as obtaining my consent to repay it. Then Owen made his choice. He told Linda he would not sign a statement blaming me, would not sign another family financial document without independent review, and would not tell me to sign the amended note. He admitted in front of Nate that he had hidden the original temporary deduction from me and said that was his mistake. He also said his authorization ended at the amount stated in his email. Linda told him he was choosing me over his family. Owen said he was choosing not to lie about the records. I did not feel victorious. He had finally said what I needed weeks earlier, but only after secrecy, reduced wages, and threats against our home. His choice mattered. It did not erase the cost required to reach it. Linda stood and said Owen no longer worked for Mitchell Building Supply. She told us to leave. I did not know whether she had completed formal employment procedures, so I treated it as a declaration, not confirmed termination paperwork. But the threat that had controlled Owen for years had finally been spoken as a consequence instead of held over him as a possibility. We walked out carrying only our copies. In the car, Owen stared at the house where he had grown up and said he had no idea what came next. I did not either. We might have lost his job. Linda still had money, company authority, relatives willing to believe her version, and enough resources to make any dispute painful. But she no longer had the one thing she had demanded from the beginning: my signature. I held the accountant's report on my lap during the drive home. The truth was finally visible. The debt Linda had used to shame me contained losses that were not mine, and the pressure to secure those losses against our household had intensified before an outside lender review. Owen had finally refused to help her make me carry them. By the time our house came into view, I understood that the old family system had already pushed us outside it. The next fight would not be about earning our way back in. It would be about whether Linda could still reach our home, our money, and our future after we stopped asking for permission to leave. By the time Owen and I reached our driveway, I knew there was no path back to the life where Linda could threaten us and still call it help. Owen parked but did not move. He said losing Mitchell Building Supply might mean losing the only career he had ever known. I told him I was scared too, but fear could not be the reason we signed away the truth. Inside, I put the accountant's report beside the original promissory note and called Thomas Hale. I told our attorney that Linda had ordered us out, declared Owen finished at the company, and again offered to reduce the disputed balance if I signed. Thomas said the next step was not another family conversation. We had to separate the debt we could verify from every charge we disputed and deal with the legitimate amount through a documented channel. The verified balance on the house loan was real, and repaying it would take nearly all the money Owen and I had saved for repairs. I stared at the bathroom estimate in our kitchen drawer and felt foolish for mourning cracked tile when our home itself had been used as leverage. Still, that money represented years of ordinary plans. I told Owen I was willing to give up the renovation fund if paying the legitimate balance would close the door Linda kept using. He wanted to wait until he found another job. I asked what waiting bought us besides another week of fear. Finally, he agreed. Thomas prepared a written calculation using the original note, our bank payments, and the outside accounting. The payment applied only to the verified principal and did not acknowledge Linda's additional charges. We sent it through the documented method Thomas recommended. Linda rejected it. I knew because Thomas forwarded her written response, claiming the amount was incomplete. The old panic returned, but Thomas reminded me that refusal did not turn a disputed number into truth. He sent the verified amount again through a formal channel that created a clear record of our attempt to satisfy what we actually owed. I stopped taking Linda's calls. Every financial message went through Thomas. When relatives contacted Owen to say I was tearing apart the family over money, I did not answer through him or ask him to defend me line by line. The documents existed whether anyone liked me or not. Owen's formal termination notice arrived 2 days later. He showed it to me at the kitchen table. There was no dramatic language, only the end of his employment at the company, where he had worked his entire adult life. He said he should have left years ago. I told him I was sorry he lost his job. But losing it did not erase what had happened between us. He had hidden the original deduction and asked me to trust a system he was afraid to question. Owen nodded. For once, he did not ask me to soften the truth to make it easier to live with. With Thomas's guidance, we submitted the payroll records and wage deductions to the appropriate state labor agency. I accused no one of anything beyond what the documents showed. We provided the pay stubs, Owen's limited authorization email, the later deductions, and the archived adjustment records he had accessed from his own employee account. The complaint asked whether the deductions and compensation changes had been handled lawfully. There was no shouting and no satisfying family showdown. There were forms, dates, attachments, and signatures. That quiet process felt stronger than any threat Linda had made. The company's outside accountant contacted Thomas again. According to the written request he forwarded to me, the accountant wanted additional internal records related to balances classified as family receivables. I did not know what those records would show, so I refused to invent another theory. But the shift was unmistakable. Linda had spent years making every financial question private, something that belonged inside the family, and therefore inside her control. Now, people who did not need her approval were asking questions. At home, freedom did not feel triumphant. Owen spent mornings applying for operations jobs outside the family business. Some relatives stopped calling him. Others called only to ask when he would apologize. I knew about those conversations because he told me afterward. I listened without demanding that he cut everyone off on my timetable. What I demanded was transparency between us. I kept my emergency account in my own name. We created a shared household spreadsheet we could both see. No family loans, hidden transfers, payroll favors, or promises made with joint money. Owen asked whether I would ever trust him again. I told him I did not know. Trust was not a switch I could turn on because he had finally chosen correctly once. If we stayed married, we would rebuild it the same way I had rebuilt the truth, decision by decision, record by record. A week later, a relative left another cream-colored envelope in our mailbox. Owen recognized Linda's handwriting. The sight of it brought me straight back to the dinner table where she had announced that I needed permission to spend my own money. I called Thomas before opening it. Inside was a short written offer. Linda would provide financial help while Owen was unemployed and reconsider the remaining family dispute if we withdrew the outside complaints and ended the accounting challenge. The language was calmer than her threats, but the structure had not changed. Money first, silence in return. I photographed every page and sent the images to Thomas. Then I put the papers back inside. Through him, I returned the envelope with a brief notice that any future communication about money, the loan, payroll deductions, or the company had to go through counsel. That became my no-contact line. I did not create it to punish Linda. I created it because direct access had always been her mechanism. A dinner became a demand. A favor became a leash. A private conversation became a test of loyalty. Removing direct access meant she could still be angry. But anger no longer arrived with a document waiting for my signature. The consequences were real. Several Mitchell gatherings happened without us. Owen learned about them from relatives who still spoke to him. I was described as controlling, ungrateful, and obsessed with money. I knew those descriptions only from messages Owen showed me. I stopped trying to correct every person. For years, I had believed being understood was necessary for being safe. It was not. Sometimes safety meant allowing people to misunderstand me from a distance. The verified loan payment was eventually accepted through the documented process Thomas arranged. The larger disputed balance remained contested, but it did not bear my signature. That difference changed the fear in my chest. Linda could claim any number she wanted. She could not produce my agreement to it. The state labor review did not settle everything immediately. The agency requested records from the company, and Thomas advised us to let the process move without turning every development into another family confrontation. I followed that advice. I no longer wanted revenge on Linda. I wanted distance, documentation, and a future that did not depend on her next move. Several weeks later, Owen found an operations job with a regional distribution company. The starting salary was lower and the commute longer. When he accepted the offer, he admitted that he had once mistaken the family company for security. I told him I had made my own mistake. I had mistaken silence for protection. We did not celebrate with a grand dinner. We ordered takeout and sat in the living room with his new employment packet between us. Owen showed me the direct deposit form before filling it out, not because I demanded proof, but because we had agreed there would be no hidden financial arrangements again. It was a small gesture. Small gestures were what I trusted now. We postponed the bathroom repairs and watched our spending more carefully. From the outside, our life probably looked poorer. Inside it, there were no unexplained deductions, no red ledger binder, and no woman at another table deciding whether I deserved permission to use my own money. One Saturday morning, I went grocery shopping alone. Near the checkout, I noticed a small porch light on sale. The fixture above our front door had been unreliable for months. I put the new one in my cart, and for a second I almost laughed at how much the choice meant. No one had to approve it. I paid with my own debit card. That afternoon, Owen installed the light while I stood on the porch holding the screws. When evening came, he flipped the switch and light spread across the front steps of the house Linda had once used to frighten me into obedience. Our marriage was still healing. The labor dispute was still moving through formal channels. Some relatives still believed I had destroyed the family. None of that vanished because a porch light worked. Later, I opened the locked cabinet in my home office and placed the empty cream envelope beside the verified loan record. I kept it as a reminder of how control had once been disguised as generosity. Then I closed the drawer. Linda still had her company, her opinions, and whatever story she chose to tell about me. What she no longer had was my signature, my paycheck, my bank password, or the right to decide what entered my home. I had imagined freedom would arrive as one dramatic escape. Instead, it came quietly through boundaries, records, smaller plans, and choices nobody else could make for me. Through the window, I could see the new light burning above our door. For the first time since Linda placed that envelope beside my plate, the house did not feel like collateral. It felt like mine.